Sophie was happy to return home after her education in Germany. She had a chance to stay, but there was no thought of living away from home, from her parents either. She loved her homeland, missed her mother and father very much, and now she was already embracing her family, riding home with them through her native and beloved streets. I'm home. I'm finally home. Sophie couldn't believe herself, unable to find the strength to peel herself away from mommy. At home, after unpacking, resting, and calming down, the whole family sat down at the table to drink tea and talk about the future. So, Sophie, now that you're a graduate, will you come work for my firm? I've been waiting for you for a long time. Without a good assistant, I'm screwed. And who can I trust more than my own, said Dad to his daughter. Of course, I'll go. Sophie laughed. But you know, Daddy, I don't just want to do business. I want to do charity too. It's very popular all over the world now. We should also adopt a useful experience. Now you're right, my daughter. Charity is also very important for businesses and businessmen. The rating goes up immediately. My father replied approvingly. I'm not so much for ratings. I just want to help people in trouble. I mean, I've been following life in our city on the internet. We have a lot of people who need help here. And you, Sophie, need to get your personal life together, said Bella, 25 years old after all. I was afraid you were going to marry a German, but well done. You came back free. Yes. And the 25th anniversary should be celebrated at home in a wide circle. Well, not just an anniversary, but to introduce you to everyone, your employees, your business partners, your competitors. So to speak, we should have a party, my father suggested. Oh, come on, Dad. What's that for? I don't like those banquets and buffets and stuff. But sometimes it's necessary, isn't it? And it will be interesting for you to see new people to show yourself off. Her father tried to convince her. Yes, yes. And maybe at this banquet, you'll find your destiny. Bella persisted. Well, Mother, you can marry me off tomorrow. Sophie sulked playfully, even if it's today to a good man. Kevin, don't forget to invite Scott and his son. She said to her husband. Bobby is a very nice young man. He's a recent graduate, too. And he's working and he's handsome, by the way. And this one, by the way, Peter, even though he's older, he's a very, very decent man. That's it, Mom. If it's going to be any kind of a lookout, I'm not going at all. Sophie was already seriously offended. Well, what a little girl you are, Sophie. I'm thinking of your future. 25 isn't 16, is it? It's about time you had a family and kids. Papa and I would be very glad to have grandchildren. Then I should not have been forced to study, but to take a course in sewing, let's say. And I would have had a locksmith husband and a bunch of kids, Sophie replied. Really, Bella, who gives birth at 16 nowadays? The girl's graduated. She's got to prove herself, Kevin said. She'll manage with her grandchildren and everything else. All right, all right. I'm not marrying anyone off, just voicing my dream. That's all. Bella agreed. I hope I don't have to wait long for it to come true. The banquet was held at the highest level. All the guests came, including sons. But Sophie's personal life has not changed a bit. The girl really decided to prove herself first, and only then to start arranging her own family. She enthusiastically started working in the firm of her father, but his main business was considered participation in a charity project. The fate of disadvantaged people are always very concerned about the girl. Her father approved of her occupation, but felt that Sophie devoted too much time to it. I thought you'd take over the management, the reporting, and that would be great. And the fact that you often visit all kinds of shelters and orphanages, and that you spend a lot of mental energy. It's still unnecessary, my father said with annoyance. What's the matter, Dad? You can't do these things without taking them to heart. But don't worry, I'm not going to have a nervous breakdown. When I see a problem, I don't panic. I look for solutions. Because you taught me that yourself, Sophie replied calmly. Well done, girl. But still leave at least some time for yourself as well. Here I fully agree with my mother. Belle had expressed her displeasure at her daughter's infatuation with Charity in a much more active way. Sophie, you were up so late again last night. How I wish I could hear that you were out on a date, or at the theater, in a restaurant, but something tells me you weren't. It's not, Mom. We're opening a crisis center, and there's a lot of work to do. But you have no idea how much it's needed. It's going to provide help for pregnant minors, both medical and legal. Look, I'll show you what kind of rooms there will be. Never mind the rooms. They'll build it. They'll open it all up. Pregnant teenagers will come running. When are you going to think about your life? My mother wouldn't let up. I do. It's all part of my life too. And don't worry about me. My daughter reassured her. How can you not worry? At least you should have some days off. When you look at all these deprived people, don't you want to be happier yourself? My mother continued. I do and I will. I'm happy now, first of all, that I can help people. Our foundation helped the boy who graduated from an orphanage to get an apartment. Isn't that happiness? Sophie answered happily. And personal happiness? My mother would not let up. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't want to tell you. But you know, if you hadn't followed me so closely in my youth, I might have found personal happiness sooner too. So get married at 16? Or have an illegitimate child? Is that what you call happiness? Not necessarily. I wasn't going to get married as a high school girl, but I would have learned how to socialize with guys. And thanks to you, I grew up with the conviction that it was shameful. You couldn't. You had to push yourself to study, not hang around on dates. I still feel that way, and I can't get over myself. Why don't you go see a psychologist then? My mother suggested. I'm not going anywhere, and I don't have the time. And I don't think it's necessary. Everything will come in its own time. Don't doubt it. I'm sure of it. And Sophie was not mistaken. The time had come. She had met her man. It happened by chance, without any preparations, not in a theater or at some banquet. The girl popped out of the office, about to grab a bite to eat in the cafe she always went to for lunch, and saw a picture that touched her deeply. A very personable young man brought a container of food to a poor old man who was begging for alms. The poor man was moved to tears as he thanked the man, shook his hand, and then, trying not to attract attention, slipped him some bills. That scene would have caused only bewilderment to many, but it delighted Sophie, just like that, without expecting any gratitude or benefit to herself, to help someone in need. This is a truly caring person, capable of compassion. She could not pass by and decided to approach this young man herself to get to know him, and maybe invite him to work for their relief fund. Excuse me, young man, I saw you helping a beggar. I work for an organization that helps the homeless and people in difficulty in general, and I would like to invite you to participate in our work. The girl blushed when she said this. Despite her determination, she was ready for the man to just brush her off, or maybe say that she was prying. But he smiled a little embarrassedly in response too. Thank you for the offer. I'm very flattered. But, alas, I cannot accept. I already work with several orphanages and a shelter for homeless animals, but I can't pass by those in need either. That's the nature of it. I was on my way to the cafe, and then I saw this old man. I'm at the cafe too. I have lunch now. The girl said, embarrassed. Well, let's go together, since we are colleagues. My name is Albert. The guy introduced himself. And I, Sophie, you know, what you did really touched me. It's a pity, oddly enough. If everyone tried to make life a little easier for disadvantaged people, the world would be a much cozier place to live, wouldn't it? But most people pass by, and even disdain those who, like us, try to help. Yes, this old man is not covered by my funds, but at least today he will have a decent meal. And the money? People say he'll drink it away. I left him a business card with the address of the place where you can get help. If he wants, he will come to me. Although many people have a consumerist attitude toward our activities, but if we save even 1 out of 100, isn't that a big deal? The young man asked with enthusiasm. I completely agree with you. And sometimes it's very hard to find understanding among ordinary people, which is why so many people are left without help. Lunch dragged on. Sophie was even a little late for work. She could not talk enough with her new friend, in whom she found complete understanding. She and Albert exchanged telephone numbers, and by the looks of the young man, Sophie understood that their conversations, and maybe even meetings, would not only be of a business nature. She liked this young man. Will there finally be a change in my life, too? She thought. And the change began swiftly. From the first meeting, Albert showed his interest in Sophie as a young, beautiful woman. Each date became a small celebration, with luxurious bouquets, with expensive gifts. For the first time, the girl became acquainted with the most romantic places in the city. She found out how nice it was to feel loved and the only one. Her parents immediately felt that the long-awaited changes in their Sophie's life had finally begun. A large snow queen has finally thawed out. A prince has appeared, and by all appearances, with serious intentions. There's the bouquets. I wish I knew who he was, but it happens all kinds of things, sighed Bella. You, Bella, are a hard man to please. One minute you're worried your daughter's got no one, and the next you're worried something's going to go wrong. Kevin brushed her off. What did you think? Do you know how many rich bride hunters there are right now? Well, I'm sorry. Sophie's not the type to flap her ears at the first person she meets. That's true, but she's too kind. If someone starts to pity her, she won't resist, especially if there's love involved. We should give her a hint to invite him to our place. There was no need to hint. After a short acquaintance, Sophie and Albert's relationship became so trusting that the girl decided to invite him to her home. He made a very favorable impression on her parents as well, an intelligent, courteous young man with impeccable manners, and by all appearances, well-to-do. Kevin and Bella did not inquire particularly about his occupation and family, but he answered some of their questions quite straightforwardly. I've been living on my own for a long time, hoping only for myself. My mother died a long time ago, and my father? I don't know, he might be alive, but I haven't seen him since I was 3. So the only family I have is my mother's sister, who needs help herself. She is sick. So I had to go into business, and I'm not boasting about it. I have had some success. Sophie's father liked that answer, but her mother did not. Well, I don't know. Orphan, no family. It can't help but be alarming. You'd better go through your channels and find out what kind of business he's in general, about his past and present, she said to her husband, after the young ones had risen from the table and retired to Sophie's room. What channels? Kevin snapped. Are you suggesting I spy on him, track him down, hide in the bushes myself, or hire a detective? And why not? He will propose to Sophie any day now. He will become part of our family. People are more responsible about choosing new owners when they give a cat away. And here's an only daughter. You know, you can say anything. Yeah, I can tell he's a good kid. But is he too good? Oh my God. Sophie will have to live her whole life as an old maid. Because for her mother, one fiancé is bad, and the other is too good. I'll give him a hint that next time he should wear dirty shoes or learn to smoke, or he'll never see my only daughter again. Joke, joke, and God forbid I be right. It would be too much of a trauma for Sophie. Sophie was unaware of her mother's doubts, so when she saw Albert off, she simply asked her parents if they liked Albert. Well, a very worthy young man, replied Kevin. Has he asked you to marry him yet? Asked Bella. No, mother, he hasn't. And if he had, would you start talking me out of it? Smiled Sophie. Well, not a minute. I just advise you to take your time. You know, so little yet. Bella excused herself. So we're in no hurry. Laugh a happy Sophie. In fact, their future wedding was almost a done deal. Although Albert had not yet formally proposed, but the relationship was developing in that direction. Sophie introduced the young man to some of her friends, invited him to her organization, where he showed considerable interest in charity work, and showed himself to be a knowledgeable man, well versed in many issues. Sophie blossomed before her eyes, her confidence in her beloved growing day by day. How kind and attentive this man was, and not only to her. Even while walking with Sophie, he could not pass by any cat or dog that seemed to be homeless. He bought some food, called the volunteers, asked them to come to the address and take the animal to further find an owner for it. This led to the expected result. One day Albert invited Sophie and her parents to the restaurant and proposed to marry him in all forms. Preparations for the wedding began. Even Bella's doubts subsided. Albert became his own man in their house and did not arouse any suspicions, demonstrating exceptional decency. Sophie herself, on the other hand, suddenly felt that Albert's decency and consideration were somewhat excessive. A new batch of doubts arose after one of the foundation employees said, I'm sorry, Sophie, maybe I'm meddling. You're a young man, we're already a fiancé. You've still introduced him to all of us. I saw him on the street the other day, and he was acting in a way that made me question his charitable affiliation. What is it? Wondered Sophie. What could he have done? You see, a homeless man, probably not very sober, came up to him, started, as I understand it, begging for money, and your Albert not only chased him away, but also shoved him roughly. And when he fell down, he kicked him. And his face at that moment was so angry that I even got scared. Well, Ellie, you must be mistaken. It wasn't Albert. Sophie didn't believe me. I wouldn't have told you if I'd had the slightest doubt. The woman pressed her lips together. I would have gone to him to told him he was behaving inappropriately, but I rushed to help the poor man. And Albert had already gotten in his car driven off. It's hard to believe, but I'll try to talk to him, Sophie muttered. But she was in no hurry to talk to her fiancé, going over the actions of her beloved in her memory. She recalled that when she witnessed touching scenes, she often thought that Albert was overdoing it. Too much pretentious, throwing himself to every homeless person, to every stray dog. Meanwhile, anyone involved in charity knows very well that simply giving money or a piece of sausage is often not the kind of help that is needed. But direct questions are far from the answer in such cases either. If Albert lies, he will continue to do so. And if all of her doubts are wrong, the young man will have every reason to be offended. Well, we'll have to check it out for ourselves. Sophie decided she already had a plan in her head that many would consider rather strange. To carry it out, she turned to an old friend who worked at a youth theater as a costume designer. It was to her that Sophie went to work. Grace, only you can help me out. I need a beggar's costume for one evening for a case. But modern. Is that possible? I mean, not a poor woman, but a total homeless woman. Sophie pleaded with her friend. Yes, as much as you like. What are you up to? What kind of masquerade? Replied Grace. It's not me. But you know where I work, right? Charity related. Well, I have to dress up as a beggar for a little show, Sophie replied, deciding not to tell her friend exactly what she needed the outfit for. We'll dress you up here in this corner, is where I have the rags. Take your pick. Grace rolled out a rack of the most shabby outfits. I'd like to do something with my face, something unrecognizable, Sophie asked, picking through the rags, put some makeup on it, stain it or something, paint a bruise on it or something. Well, you've got a lot of reach there. That's why you need our makeup girl, Violet. She's a real artist. I'll tell you that she'll paint you so much that your mother wouldn't recognize you. Get dressed up and let's go to her. Wow, you picked yourself a real bum. Grace took her friend to the makeup artist, and she wanted to clean up when she looked in on Sophie. Half an hour later, she was aghast. Violet, you seem to have overdone it. I brought you a girlfriend, beautiful and young, and you're bringing me back some old granny. Well, Sophie, don't be surprised if the homeless give you alms, too. How will you walk around town dressed like that? The girl asked in surprise. I won't. There's a car waiting for me at the entrance with a chauffeur and a guard. Sophie really didn't have much faith in the success of her venture, so she took two of her father's bodyguards with her, one of whom got behind the wheel. After saying goodbye to the girls, she quickly walked to the car, tapped her finger on the window, and the guard looked at the unkempt old woman with a faded black eye, slightly opening the window, not hiding his squeamishness. Well, what do you want? He asked gruffly. It's me, Sophie. Don't you recognize me? Laughed the girl. Oh, Sophie, you're unrecognizable except by your voice. The guard hurriedly opened the door and let Sophie in. All is agreed. Guys, you stop and wait to see what happens next. She had already briefly briefed the man. In fact, she hoped that nothing much would happen. No, the fact that Albert was lying to her, she already knew. She called the charities her fiancé supposedly worked with, but they knew nothing about him and certainly didn't receive any generous donations. She didn't want to know anything else, and she had started her masquerade in order to avoid any painful explanations. Still, she wished that Albert, whom she continued to love in spite of everything, would not turn out to be at least so cruel a man. She got out of the car and hunched over, began to wander down the street, where her lover would inevitably soon pass. Here he came, a handsome, stylish, confident man. Sophie hurriedly approached. Son, she called out to the man, trying to change her voice as much as possible. Listen, son, help me, for Christ's sake. Albert glanced at her, grimaced annoyingly, but didn't even stop. What do you want? You're rich, at least this way to the bread. A week without eating would help, eh? Sophie continued following him, hearing that in her voice already sounds genuine despair. So this is what a real homeless person feels like. The thoughts suddenly flashed through my head. Piss off. The boy gritted through his teeth. At least a little bit, you're kind. The old woman kept up, and catching up with the young man, took him by the sleeve. Fuck you, Albert shouted in his full voice, grabbed her by the arm, and forcefully shoved her away from him. Sophie couldn't resist and fell to the sidewalk. Immediately her guards were there. One grabbed the boy by the arm. The other began to help the beggar girl up. What's going on? She fell by herself. Albert began. But then he looked at the fallen woman. A layer of makeup was not hiding her familiar facial features after all. Sophie said in her usual voice. Well, benefactor, it all makes sense now. That you also help orphanages and animal shelters. I also know. Good day, said Sophie firmly and followed the guards to the car. Sophie, what are you doing? Shouted Albert confusedly and moved to follow his departing bride, but immediately realized that it was no use. God damn it. It all fell apart, and just when everything was going according to plan. Well, the Viper. How the hell did she think of that? And why would she do that? Well, what do we do now? He thought, standing in the middle of the sidewalk, looking after the car as it drove away. Yes, there was much to consider. Albert was no benefactor or businessman, but an ordinary man from an average income family who dreamed of more. His parents were alive and well, but he had no relationship with them and had no special feelings for them either. They had raised him, educated him, and well, thank you. But he did not consider himself indebted to anything. He had long ago left home and gone to seek happiness, using his own data, especially external. Yes, he had his parents to thank for that too. His face, his figure, and his intelligence, by the way. No, Albert would have been offended if someone had called him an Alfonso or a crook. He didn't consider him